Hello friends, welcome to the course Multivariate Procedure with R. Now, from this lecture and in the next couple of lecture, we are going to talk about the random variables and probability distributions. And we are going to begin with a univariate case and then gradually I will extend it to a multivariate case. Now, the next question comes, why do we need a random variable? The basic job of statistics is to analyze the data. Now, how the data is collected, on what? It depends on the objective. Suppose the objective is to know the age of the persons staying in a colony. Then what are you going to do? You are going to collect the observations on age of those people who are staying in that colony. You are not going to collect the observation on the weight of those people who are staying in the same colony. Also, you are not going to collect the age of those people who are staying in some other area, some other colony. So, if you try to see in this very simple example, when the objective is to find out the average age of the people who are staying in a colony, you are going to collect the observations on the age of people who are staying in that colony. So, now what is age? Age is a variable on which you are going to collect the observation. Similarly, if you want to know the effect of a medicine in controlling the blood pressure, would you like to do? You will try to give the dose of the medicine to a group of patients and then you will try to record the data on blood pressure. You are not going to collect the data on the body temperature of those patients. But in case if your objective is that how the medicine is going to control the body temperature or fever of the people, then what are you going to do? Then you are going to collect the data on the body temperature. So you see, based on the objective of the study, you always try to define a variable on which you are going to collect the data. Now, when you are trying to collect the data on certain variable, there is always going to be some random variation which is beyond our control. Suppose if I ask you that what is the content of nitrogen in the soil in a field, do you agree with me that the content of the nitrogen of the soil in the entire field is going to be the same? Or similarly, if I say what is the level of moisture in the soil in that field, do you think that the level of moisture at every point in the field is going to be the same? No. There will be a small variation. So that is why there is some uncertainty involved in the observation. And that is why in practice or practically we say that we have got a random variable on which we are going to collect the observation. Now, different questions crop up. How should you define the random variable? How should you measure this uncertainty? And and when the observations are going to have uncertainty, their behavior will depend on the type of process what they have. So, how to characterize the behavior of the process through a mathematical function? Why do you need a mathematical function? We understand and we believe that any result which is based on the foundations of mathematics is acceptable and it is well accepted at every place. It is just like if I declare in my class that all the students who are wearing a blue shirt, they will be getting a grade A, and all the students who are wearing a, say, this white shirt, they will be getting a grade B, and all those students who are getting, say, this grade C, those who want to have grade C, they have to wear, suppose, a black color shirt, and so on. Do you think that this type of decision is going to be acceptable? Certainly not. But if I say, okay, I will take your exam and I will give you some questions for which I have taught you in the whole semester, and if you get more than 90% marks, I will give you grade A. In case if you say get between 75 and 90% mark, then I will give you grade B and so on. Do you think that this decision is going to be acceptable? Answer is yes. Now, what is the difference between the two ways of making decision? In the second case, there is an involvement of mathematics. So that is why whenever we are trying to find anything from the data, that has to be in some mathematical format. And that is why whatever we are observing, that has to be a numerical value. Whatever is the uncertainty involved, that has to be defined in such a way which is mathematically compatible. So now all these different aspects we are going to discuss in this lecture and in a couple of lectures in the future. Now in this lecture we are going to talk about the random variables. So basically I can tell you we have a very well defined definition of random variables, which is based on strong foundations of mathematics. But definitely, the objective in the course is not to go into the details of mathematical statistics. We have a topic, measure theory, in which we try to define the random variables in a proper way using the proper mathematical definition. But definitely here I am going to make it in a very simple way so that you can understand it from the application point of view. Now, in case if I try to broadly classify, you can have two types of observations. For example, if you roll a dice, then there can be possibilities of number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. But if I ask you to measure the heights of the students, that can be 155 centimeter, that can be 155.1 centimeter, that can be 150.5.11 centimeters and so on. So you can see that in the case of height, the values can be taken in a defined interval. Whereas in the rolling of a dice, the values are going to be taken are only the integer values. And beside this thing, when you try to roll a die, then there is always the probability of occurrence of the event. And in case if you try to define your event, then the probability is defined, and if the event changes, then the probability of event also changes. So event what you are going to observe is something, but you want to translate it to a mathematical function. Because the basic requirement in statistics is that we need the mathematical data, or we need the values in mathematics on which we can do different types of mathematical operations. So now we try to understand these things one by one. And in this lecture, let us try to understand the basic concept of continuous and discrete random variables. So let us begin our lecture. So now the first question comes here, why do you need a random variable? And this random variable can be univariate, bivariate, or say multivariate. Univariate means there is only one variable, bivariate means there are two variables, and multivariate means there are, say, this more than one variable. Bivariate is also a particular case of multivariate. So we know that some concepts are required to draw the statistical conclusion from a sample of data about a population of interest. Why? If you try to see what is the basic objective of statistics, statistics is always trying to observe a small sample of data, and based on that it always try to take some statistical conclusions which are valid for the entire population, right? For example, in case if you want to know that what is the initial salary of students who are graduating in the statistics subject from a university. Now, what you can do, that you can draw there a sample. Suppose I try to draw a sample of say 100 students who are going to complete their degrees in the statistics program, and based on that we will try to find out that what is the average salary of these 100 students, but we are going to use it to define or to give the information for the whole population, that means the expected salary of all the students who are graduating or completing their degree with the statistics subject. Similar is the case when we are trying to deal with a clinical trial. Medicine is exposed or given to a group of people, but whatever are the conclusions, they are going to be valid over the entire population, right? Suppose there is some new medicine, new drug that is given to a sample of selected patients, and suppose some patients show improvement and some patient does not show the improvement. So, and our objective is that we want to understand what are the different effects or consequences of this medicine when it is given to, say, people in this country or in this world. So that means the population of patients. So now, in order to understand this thing, in order to implement this concept, that how to implement the conclusion based on a small sample to a whole population, we need some basic statistical concept, and among them, the random variables are going to lay the foundation of the theoretical concepts which are required to make such statistical inferences and conclusion. You would like to go for sampling, you would like to go for estimation, we would like to go for test of hypothesis, which are the different components of the statistical inference, and you will see the beginning of all this procedure is the random variable. Now, let me try to give you an idea or an example through which I can explain you that what is an experiment, what are the outcomes, and how a random variable is associated and how it is transformed to a statistical function. So let me take here a very simple example of coin, where we toss the coin, and whenever we toss a coin, the outcomes are either head or tail. Right. So we know that the sample space in such a case, which we are trying to denote by capital omega, that's a standard symbol for the sample space. It is a collection of all such points which I'm trying to indicate by small omega, where this small omega can be either head or tail. Right. So I can say now here that okay, the outcome of a tossing of a coin is either head or tail. So just by writing ST or head or tail, do you think that is it really going to help us? It is very difficult to handle the elements in statistics if they are not in numbers. So now we need to do something so that we can convert this outcome of head and tail into some numbers, which is in turn going to help us in doing different types of statistical calculations. So now we suppose we define this capital X to be a function such that when omega is observed as head, that is small omega, then the value of the x, which is indicated by here x omega, takes 1, and if the outcome is tail, then x omega takes value 0. So now if you try to see, on one side you have here head and tail, and on other side you have here the numericals, some numbers. And in statistics, as soon as we have numbers, we are in a position to implement our mathematical functions. So you can see here that now x is a real valued function which is defined on the sample space capital omega. But what is happening? That capital omega has head and tail. Now it is bringing us to some other space where these are going to be indicated by here two numbers like this, 1 for head and 0 for tail. So this type of transformation is needed, and this type of transformation is being done by this function here x. Right. So this x is called as random variable. Why this is called as a random variable? Because when you toss a coin, then unless and until the experiment is completed, you don't know whether you are going to get head or tail. So there is some randomness involved. So now this head is denoted by 1 and tail by 0. So this sample space omega has now 2 points, 0 and 1, right? So you can see here earlier this omega was here h and t, but now omega is transformed to a new set of values where which takes value 0 and 1. So now in any random experiment, we are always interested in the value of some numerical quantity which is determined by the result. We are not really interested in all the details of the experiment. I'm not really interested that how you have tossed the coin, whether 5 feet high or 7 feet high or in the 20 degrees centigrade or say 100 degrees centigrades. This is not my concern. What I want, I just want, please give me the outcome. Head, tail, head, etc. And these quantities of interest, they are determined by the result of the experiment, and these are associated with this random variables. Right. Now, because these values are determined by the outcome of an experiment, and we are trying to associate here a random variable whose outcome is not known with 100% confidence. That if you toss a coin, unless and until it comes on the ground, you don't know whether it is going to be head or tail. Both the possibilities are there. So suppose we assume, or we say that okay, there are 50% chances a head will come, and 50% chances the tail will come. So in that case, we can associate the probability with the outcomes of the random variable. So you can see here that x is taking values here 1 and 0, 1 for head. So if I say that x equal to 1, that means head is observed, and the probability of observing x equal to 1, that is the probability of observing here head, this is 1 upon 2, 0.5. And similarly, the probability of observing tail, that is the random variable x takes value 0, is also here 1 by 2. So now we can view x as a random variable which collects the possible outcomes of the random experiment and capture the uncertainty associated with them. Right. So this is how we are going to introduce the random variable. So now if I try to translate whatever I have explained you, so now in short I can say here that let capital omega represent the sample space of the random experiment, that what are the possible values which can be observed, and let this capital R be the set of real numbers. Right. Now I can define, or I can say that a random variable is a function x which assigns to each element small omega belonging to capital omega one and only one number. For example, x omega is equal to small x belongs to R. That is, x is trying to map capital omega to R. So that you can see here, capital omega in the earlier example had 2 points h and t, and R had here 2 points 1 and 0. H is being transported to 1 and t being transported to 0. So h and t are mapped to 1 and 0 respectively. Right. So before I go further with the details of this random variable and other aspect, let me try to explain you here what is the convention in statistic, that how do we indicate the random variable and its values. You know that when you are trying to define a random variable, then you are going to get the observation on them. For example, suppose if I say that I want to have the observation on the heights of the students. Heights of students. So these heights are going to be measured for different student in, say, suppose centimeters. So I can define the heights of the student as a random variable capital X. And suppose now I obtain the height of, say, student number, say here 1. And suppose it comes out to be, suppose here 100 centimeters. So this is indicated by here small x. And this is the first observation, so I can say here this is small x1. And similarly, if I say that height of the student number 2 is suppose 180 centimeters, then this can be denoted by here small x2. So now what I am trying to do, I am trying to indicate the height of the student as capital X in capital alphabets and the associate values in lowercase alphabets. And these numbers are trying to indicate the observation number. This is the first observation, second observation, and so on. Similarly, in case if I try to, suppose I decide that, okay, let me try to also collect the weights of the students. So now I can use here another variable here, say here capital Y, to indicate the weights of the student, and suppose we are going to measure them in kilogram. Suppose the weight of the student number 1 comes out to be, suppose here 50 kilogram. So this will be denoted by here small y1. And suppose weight of the second student comes out to be 60 kilogram, then it is going to be indicated by small y2. So if you try to see what I have done, I am trying to indicate the random variables by the uppercase alphabets and their values by the lowercase alphabets. So actually this is a convention in statistics to indicate or denote the random values by capital letters, alphabets, uppercase alphabets, and their values by small letters, say this lowercase alphabets. So if I try to take the random variable to be here capital X, then their values will be, say here small x. Right. So that is, and if I try to write down here, say Suppose if I write down here, let x1, x2, say x100 be the heights of students. What does this mean? That means we have got 100 numerical values, or we have got the heights of the 100 students, which are some number, which are some numerical values, right? Okay. Now, when we are talking about the random variables, then we have two types of random variable. One is called as discrete random variable, RV means random variable, and other is continuous random variable. What are these things? So let me try to first give you a brief idea, and then I will try to give some more examples of these type of random variables. So when you are trying to consider a random variable which is taking the values only at some points, then it is called in simple word as discrete. For example, if I say the number of heads obtained when you are tossing a coin 100 times. So you toss a coin 100 times, try to count the number of heads. Once again, try to toss a coin 100 times, count the number of heads. So this number is always going to be an integer, and it can take all possible values between 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 100. But if I say there are 25.5 heads, it's not there. So all the values, they are concentrated only at some points. So the random variable whose set of possible values can be written as a finite sequence x1, x2, xn, or as an infinite sequence x1, x2 dot dot dot, they are said to be discrete. So the sample space of such a random variable, that is said to be discrete if it consists of a finite or countable set of outcomes, right? For example, in the example which I just explained you, that you try to toss a coin for 100 times and then try to count the number of heads. In such a case, the random variable, it is a random variable whose set of possible values is the set of non-negative integers 1 to 100, and this is a discrete random variable. So now we consider an example. Suppose there is a customer care phone and which has 30 external lines. That means there are something like 30 telephone connections, and different customers are calling to the customer care. So at a particular time that some of the lines will be used and others may be free. So at a given point of time, suppose 5 customers are calling, then 5 of the lines will get occupied. If there are 10 customers which are calling, then the 10 lines will be occupied. And suppose if more than 30 customers are calling at the same time, then all the 30 lines will be used and the customer will be asked to wait, right? So now at a given point of time, how many telephone lines are being used, that is not known to us. So this can be indicated by a random variable x. So now you can see here x can take difference between different values, say from 1 to 30. That means only one line is being used, or 2 lines are used, or 30 lines are used. Now suppose if I say that at a particular time there are 5 telephone lines which are being used, that means the value of the capital X here is 5. So this is going to be indicated by small x. So I can say here, if 5 lines are used, then small x will be equal to 5, and this is how we are going to interpret it. Okay, so now I have given you a fair idea about the discrete random variable. Now I come to continuous random variable. Suppose the length or temperature fluctuation or calibration, cutting tool wear, bearing wear, etc., they have to be measured, right? And they are going to be measured in some units. For example, the temperature fluctuation, that can be in degree centigrades or degree Fahrenheit. Whereas those cutting tool wear, that means when you are trying to use an equipment, it gets distorted. So how much it has been distorted after being used, that can be measured in some units, like how much material is reduced in grams or volume, etc. But anyway, you can see that whenever you are trying to measure such observations, then what is going to happen? Yeah, first of all, there will be small variations in the measurements. And these variations may be due to different reasons. For example, just now I had given you an example that if you want to measure the moisture level in the soil in a field, then the level of moisture content in different parts of the field it is not going to be same, but there will be small variation. So now in such a situation, if you try to represent by capital X the quantity which you are going to measure, then you cannot say that the random variable is going to take the values only at some finite values. For example, as in the case of discrete, we say that if there are 5 telephone lines are going to be used, then the value of the random variable is 5. And if 8 lines are going to be used, then the value of the random variable is 8. But in the case of this here moisture level in the soil, or say temperature, this can be 30 degrees centigrade, 30.1 degrees centigrade, 30.11 degrees centigrade, 30.111 degrees centigrade, and so on. So there will be some random variation, and these values are going to be defined as if the random variable is going to assume the values in the form of an interval of real numbers. Right. So if I try to consider that for any equipment you are going to measure the length, temperature fluctuation, calibration, etc., this type of model will give us an idea about the precision in the length measurements. But these values are going to be measured on some continuous scale. There will always exist values between two values. That is what I mean to say. So now I can say that there exists random variable that take on a continuum of possible values, and such variables are known as continuous random variables. And so another example I can give you is for measuring the lifetime of a bulb. That can be 1 day, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 second, etc. So in case if you want to make an assumption on the bulb's lifetime, then we can assume that the lifetime of the bulb is lying in some interval, say A and B, where A and B both are positive. Right. So in such a case, we have a concept of, say, this continuous random variable. And in both the cases, we have considered the univariate case. That means there is only one variable. Now we are going to consider a situation where the process is going to be affected by two random variables. So we call them as a bivariate random variable. So these two random variables, they can be independent, they may be dependent. What does this mean? The two random variables are going to be independent if the occurrence or non-occurrence of one variable does not affect the occurrence or say non-occurrence of the second variable. And they are dependent that if the occurrence in the first variable affect the outcome in the second variable. Right. Well, we will understand that how to define such a independence through the random variable in the forthcoming lectures. And both these random variables, they can be continuous, means both are continuous, both are discrete, or a combination of them, that one of them is continuous and another is discrete. So this is the general setup of a bivariate random variable, right? For example, in case if I say I want to measure the height and weight of a person, so this can be indicated by saying that let x1 indicates the height and x2 indicate the weight of a person. And both we know that height and weight, they are the positive values. So I can say that the person's height and weight are assumed to take on any value in the interval a1, b1 and a2, b2 respectively. Right, so height lies between a1, b1 and weight lies between a2, b2. For example, height can be between, suppose, say 50 centimeters to suppose 170 centimeters, and the weight can be, suppose here 10 kilograms to here 60 kilograms. Right, so these are some numerical values. So now the question is this: in statistics, how do we express such a bivariate random variable? So it is indicated by a 2 cross 1 vector. Now, this is a mathematical vector like vectors and matrices. It is not a data vector of the R software. So we try to indicate here as, say here, it's a vector of random variable x1 and x2, and we write this here as say x underscore is a 2 cross 1 vector, or because I can write down here as say x1 x2 transpose. And when we are trying to have these two random variables, then some other properties also come into existence. Now, if you try to see, I started with a univariate random variable, I extended to two random variable, and similarly I can extend to a general setup where we have more than two random variables. Right, and this setup will be called as multivariate random variable. So suppose there are more than two random variables, and once again all the random variables, they can be independent, they can be dependent, and we have a statistical measures by which we can actually judge. And it is possible that all the random variables, they can be continuous, they can be discrete, or they can be a combination, that some are continuous and some are discrete. So this is the setup of a multivariate random variable, right? So say one simple example can be, if I try to extend the example of height and weight, that suppose I want to measure the, say, the different parameters of a human being. So suppose I want to measure the person's height, weight, age, blood sugar and blood pressure. So there are going to be, height can be measured by x1, weight can be measured by x2, age can be measured by x3, blood sugar can be measured by x4, and blood pressure can be measured by x5, right? And suppose all these variables will have some numerical values which are going to be assumed that, that height, which is indicated by x1, it is lying between a1, b1. Second variable x2 is lying between a2, b2. Third variable is lying between a3, b3. Fourth variable is lying between a4, b4, and fifth variable is lying between a5, b5. And for example, I can assume, depending on the situation, suppose I assume that all ai and bi's, they are greater than 0. Right, although I am taking here an example where all the variables I am assuming to be continuous, but they can be discrete also, or it is possible that suppose x1, x2, x3 are continuous and x4 and x5 are discrete. That is also possible. But here my objective is to give you the idea of what is a multivariate random variable. So now all these five variables, they can be expressed in a vector which is of order 5 by 1. And the way I had expressed x1 and x2, similarly I can extend it to x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, or this is a transpose of x1, x2, x3, x4, x5. Now in case if you want to take the observations. So suppose if I consider here a bivariate setup. So suppose if I say here person number here 1 and say person number here 2, and suppose the height of the person number 1 comes out to be 150 centimeters, and the weight of the person number 1, this comes out to be, suppose here, 50 kilograms. And for the person number 2, suppose the height comes out to be 160 centimeters and the weight is suppose 60 kilograms. So now these are the observations which are going to be indicated by x1 underscore like this, and the second observation is going to be like here x2 underscore. Right. Similarly, if you try to consider here a multivariate setup, so now you will have, suppose I have the data of here person number 1 and person number 2. For the person number 1, you will have here a vector of 5 by 1. Height, weight, age, blood sugar, blood pressure. And similarly for the person number 2, height, weight, age, blood sugar and blood pressure. And this will be indicated by here x underscore 1, and the data of the second person will be indicated by x underscore 2. So that is indicating that these are the observations on the case here 5 variables, right? So now I can now express in general that suppose we have got here p random variables which are indicated by capital X1, capital X2 up to here capital XP. So all these variables can be defined in the setup of a p cross 1 random vector, and this vector can be indicated by here as x underscore, and which will be here a p cross 1 vector consisting of values x1, x2, xp, and which can also be written as say here x1, x2, xp transpose. Now in case if you want to get here the first value, then it will be like as a first value on x1, first value on x2, first value on here, say here xp. Like I can say x11, x12 up to here x1p. And similarly, you can have here the second value, third value, and so on. So in such a case, the space of x, this random vector, will consist of set of n tuples. That means n sets of observation. If I say here we are getting here x1, x2, xn like this. Okay, so now we come to an end to this lecture, and you can see here that was a pretty elementary lecture, but my objective was to expose you with the concept of random variables, because you will see that in all the statistical tool, our first sentence is going to be let x be a random variable. That can be a univariate random variable, that can be a bivariate random variable, or that can be a multivariate random variable. It depends on the requirement and objective of the study, that what we really want to do. And depending on the setup, that depending on the choice of random variables, our statistical tools are also going to differ. In case if my random variable is continuous, then the way I am going to operate or find out different types of tools, for example, mean or even variance, that is going to be a different way in comparison to when my random variable is discrete. And suppose if we have a combination, then we have to see that how are we going to compute different statistical quantities. Now, depending on the nature of random variable, we have different types of characterization of the probability function, and based on that, all other tools, they also change. So now, but at this moment, my request to you will be, try to have a look in some books and try to read more about this random variables. Once again, I will say, the way I have explained you the random variable concept in this lecture, this is a very elementary one. But my objective was to expose you so that I can take you forward to a multivariate setup. In case if my objective is to give you a course on probability theory or measure theory, possibly I will give you all those basic definitions here. And believe me, we have very concrete, solid definitions which are based on hardcore mathematics for random variables and different types of concept that we are going to use further. But once again, I will say that I'm not going into the mathematical details. Well, I have limited time here, but I will request you that you try to now start reading a book on any this probability theory or the probability distribution, mathematical statistics, whatever book you want. There are books which are varying from lower level of mathematics to a hardcore mathematics, and this is the way by which we both can go together, and the learning and in the same time the learning process can make you learn better. You will understand more concept. So you try to read from the book, try to understand these concepts, and I will see you in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye.